Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this Monday. You actually picked a great week to drop in on what's happening with government affairs, because this is one of the big weeks at the General Assembly. It's called crossover week. And there are some rules in the General Assembly that if a bill, certain bills, most bills, if they don't pass one chamber or the other, in other words, if they don't get voted out of the House or the Senate by the crossover date, which I think is Thursday,
Correct.
and they're dead. And they're dead not just for this year, but also for next year as well. There are some exceptions to that, bills with money particularly, but there's a big push on, which means it's going to be a long week for your elected officials. These are the weeks where oftentimes sessions will go into the wee hours of the morning, although we'll see whether they get that this time or not. They're a little bit more organized. Anyway, we have a lot of irons in the fire this year. This is the long session. There are a lot of bills that are paying attention. I think at last count, Cady sends me a list at the end of the week of all the bills we're watching out there that have been introduced, and there were 277, if I remember right, on that list out of the 1,000 plus that have been introduced. A lot of those are bad bills for us, a lot of them, and we managed to make sure they don't go anywhere. And then a lot of bills are just question marks that we're watching closely. So we have to check the calendars, what's happening with this bill. It's some related area to us, but so far it's not bad, but we can't be trustful of that. And then about 30 of those bills are actually things that either we or coalition partners are working on that will directly impact our business in a positive way. And that's a lot right there. They're not all our bills per se, but they're all bills we're interested in. The other aspect of this session, which is really good, is that finally the General Assembly is paying attention to housing. Housing, as we can tell all of you out there, is a big issue for North Carolinians. There's not enough inventory. Doesn't look like there's going to be enough inventory for a long time, and we've got to figure out ways of getting more housing, not just for you to sell, but for North Carolinians to live in. And so we have a number of bills there. They won't all get passed this session, but they're all being discussed. And we have to get the ball rolling because it took us about a decade to get into this mess. It's going to take us several years to try to get out of it. But we do have their attention. I'm going to let Cady talk about some of the bills that have either crossed over or on the verge of crossing over. Or some of the other big bills that we just kind of want to bring you up to date on. If you have any questions about things that we aren't talking about, please send them our way. Or if you have questions that you want more clarification, put those in there as well. Cady.
Great. Thank you, Mark, and good afternoon, everyone. As he said, this will be a very busy week at the General Assembly. Thankfully, all of our priority bills that have to make crossover have done so. So one of those priority bills being the fix for delaying the rules for the appraisal board rules on PREA. One is the 40-year lien and making sure that those folks taking advantage of people in North Carolina who are not getting a full picture of what they're signing on to is the 40-year lien bill that will outlaw those, make it much more clear. That has already passed over as well. And the bill that increases the limit in the beach plan for insurance purposes, that passed over last week as well. So those are three of the sort of not necessarily housing, but we're all on our list that had to make crossover that have done so. So we are good there. One of the housing bills that has made crossover that was subject to crossover also happened last week, and that is the bill that would allow accessory dwelling units by right all across North Carolina. Currently, 26 municipalities out of about 560 allow ADUs, and so they're seeing some success as a way to create a little bit more housing stock. It's certainly not the end all be all, but it is one piece of the puzzle. And so that bill did pass very with a great vote, over 100 votes for it last week, and will now go to the Senate. Another housing bill that is not subject to crossover is our House counterpart to Senate Bill 317, which we talked about a lot whenever people were here for legislative days, and we really focused on with the legislature. So this bill has a lot of pieces to it, and it's the workforce housing bill that we would hope would create a large amount of inventory, both market-based and workforce housing. This bill is, taking a lot of time to negotiate. I'll let, Mark kind of get a little more into that if he would like, but the Senate version does have to make crossover, so that one will likely not move. But the House bill, because it has a fee in it, does not have to make crossover. So once we get past this deadline, we'll go back to the stakeholders and start working to see what we can do to help facilitate getting House Bill 562 going with the stakeholders. But this is going to be a long process. This bill has a lot of nuances to it that people did not anticipate, maybe as much as we, some things have come up with this regarding being allowed in industrial zones and economic development. And so, as well as the income levels not being high enough, because in a lot of areas where people are not able to buy homes because they're priced too much, they still have relatively high, quote unquote, high salary ranges and good jobs, especially if they are a working family of two. And so those income rates may not be high enough. So, just little things like that aren't little, but have to be negotiated, have to be worked out in order to make this a very successful bill and get to what we want it to do. Mark, would you like to add anything on that?
Sure. I mean, and this is probably the most complicated bill that we've had for a while. And it also is really innovative and it's a brand new idea and so it's taking a while for us to understand all the ramifications. And I think it's a good lesson just in governing here, that when you pass something through legislation or regulation, there are the intended consequences, and then sometimes there are the unforeseen or unintended consequences. And I think what's happening is people are getting more comfortable with the concept of this bill. They're looking at the fine print and saying, I'm not sure this is going to work the way you're intending it to, but at least it won't work in all areas that way. And so we have to work through that. It's also because it's such a big change in the way we develop in North Carolina. It's brought out an awful lot of opposition, as you can imagine, from a lot of municipalities that don't want to give up their power to regulate and make decisions for property owners. So we get a lot of pushback there. And there's others, just because it's an unknown, people have a fear of the unknown. So this is one of those bills that may take a session or two to get through, but still will remain a top priority of ours, because it will, when enacted, bring a lot of units of housing into the market and do so more quickly with less regulatory cost. And so that's just good for everyone out there who's looking for housing, in particular, and all of you who are looking for listings to sell as well. So if you're a betting person, you may want to just hold your bets on this one for now. But we'll see. And the good news is you can't get to the end unless you start the process. And this process has been started, and it's certainly been a very vigorous debate so far.
Great, thank you. So some other bills are related to housing that are moving this week. We've got one that Representative Brody has introduced, House 488, that will split the current building code council by taking the residential piece from the state building code and creating a separate residential building code and building code council. That bill will be in House Finance tomorrow. And the goal is that for him and the home builders, this is one of their priority bills, is to allow for the General Assembly to have a makeup of that board, have some appointees to that board, not just the governor, and then also to allow them to be more nimble, a much smaller board than the current state building code council. The bill also would change the energy codes that the state building code council adopted for or are considering to adopt for the residential new builds, push that back a little bit. So that one will be in committee this week. It is subject to crossover, so we will continue to monitor and see how that goes. Another one is House 332. This would affect buildings for multifamily and would hopefully reduce the cost for commercial and multifamily building by putting in a shot clock on local governments on when they have to respond to certain permits. Because right now it's taking in some areas a very long time to get permits reviewed. And then there's a big back and forth process that's happening that is delaying projects and costing a lot of money, especially as we've seen inflation and the costs of goods going up drastically over about 6-month period. If it takes that long to get your permit, then you've obviously got more cost that you're going to have to put out. One that is not subject to crossover is another workforce housing bill that has been introduced by Representative Zinger. This would also provide a grant to the Housing Finance Agency to start basically a new division that would build workforce housing and then ensure that it would maintain workforce housing by the loans being run through the Housing Finance Agency. You'll recall the reason that we could not guarantee and put deed restrictions on the workforce housing piece in House 562 or 317 is because FHA and VA loans do not allow such deed restrictions. However, if the money is flowing through the Housing Finance Agency, they can have deed restrictions. And so that's where those funds would be maintained and folks would be able to get loans through them. On the other side, we have several property management bills that are out there dealing with landlord-tenant laws and a lot of bad ones, a couple of good ones that are moving through. One of the good ones by Representative John Bradford deals with things like service animals and late fees, makes minor changes to some of the statutes with regards to what landlords can recoup, as well as puts in place some standards around service animals in North Carolina. So that is on the move. It should be in rules tomorrow and then on the floor later this week and is subject to crossover. So with that, I will take any questions. So the question is, how do we answer the question of how will the workforce housing be exclusively offered to the folks the inventory is made, to those folks the inventory is made available and not purchased by non-owner occupants? So the bill does require that the purchaser live in the house for the majority of 1 year, because that is all we can guarantee or require for a federal loan such as I've discussed. Unfortunately, we can't go further than that, but the local governments will be the ones that would determine that the workforce housing is met, that requirement is met before giving the CO, the certificate of occupancy, to the builder to sell it to that person who is of workforce. So it wouldn't be the developer or the builder, it would be the local government who's issuing the permit. Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I don't think we have any other questions, but you know how to reach us, and we'll keep you posted as things progress this week. If there's anything that crazy happens, you will hear about it. Mark, any closing remarks?
No, just thanks for your support. For those of you who are investors in RPAC, thank you for the support too. It's really a pleasure to be able to walk the halls, have people come up to us and ask us how they can help, who understand our issues. When we come to them, that doesn't mean that we've got their vote necessarily, but to have open doors and conversations is a big, big help to Cady and her lobbying team. It's and that's because we get realtor champions elected. And thank you all for that and for your support of us in every way that you do it. Really appreciate it. So more to come. Read your Realtor Advocate every Friday, and you'll get more updates, and call us if you need something. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.